Infrastructure Grant Program for program year 2018 and is introduced by Councilmember Butler. Ordinance 3818 is an ordinance amending the 2018 appropriation ordinance and is introduced by Councilmember Reisner. Ordinance 3918 is an ordinance waiving the residency requirement for the appointment of a new service safety director and is introduced by all council members. We'll now move on to ordinances for first reading. Ordinance 4118 is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to submit an application and enter into an agreement with ODOT, Ohio Department of Transportation, for a Transportation Alternatives Program grant for the Uptown Cross Street Pedestrian Bicycle Improvements Project and declaring an emergency. And this is introduced by Councilmember Katsas.
President Nisley, thank you. And with this this ordinance 04118, this is a transportation alternatives program. This is offered through ODOT, and so the city is seeking to apply for a grant that would happen. This would actually happen a couple of years down the pipe. Somewhere in the low 20s, I believe, is when we might be looking at the improvements. The areas that the administration is looking at is five and a half different blocks. East Union Street from Court to College. This is Washington Street from College to Congress, and State Street between College and Congress, and then also Mill between College and State. The type of improvements that we're looking for in these areas are bump outs at intersections to have shorter crossing distances for pedestrians, rehabbing existing infrastructure, and also looking at the streets from a complete street standpoint. So that the TAP funding is 95% funded at this point currently. 80% comes from ODOT, and 15% is an additional. Andy Stone was trying to explain this to me, and I believe it is. And I may have this slightly incorrect, it comes from monies from leasing of turnpikes. But I don't know if that's state or federal level, but yeah, so that is the ordinance. So okay. We'll open it up for questions. Member Butler.
I just wanted to express my support as we move forward with this. I think it's wise, I think it's beneficial for our infrastructure. Similar cities, I believe Logan as well as Lancaster have implemented shorter crosswalks and bumping out the sidewalk. It's a beautification effort as well as a safety effort. I think it makes sense. Again, I want to express my support. Thank you.
Member Reisner.
Can you refresh my memory of what complete streets means?
Complete streets is an approach of planning when you're looking at a street, and you take into what the street is doing, and in the way of moving pedestrians or other vehicles. So we're talking cars, we're talking mass transit, bicycles. So it's looking at that area in that right of way in a holistic fashion, saying what is the street doing there? What do we need to do in order to make it work better with all of those systems that need to exist in that certain area?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Patterson.
Member Katsas, we do have a March or a May 1 deadline on this for this grant, and okay. So I'll likely ask for suspension on the second reading.
Okay.
We do have time, but I just want to alert everyone that we do have a deadline that we're up against, which to get the application in, which is May 1.
Okay, thank you. And you know, since we're still kind of hashing out exactly what this is going to cost, Andy kind of had a rough estimate where he was taking some of the elements from the West Union block that was just redone and multiplying it by 5.5, and so that's kind of, so I can't really attach a number to it just yet, but that'll come in time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll move on to the next series of ordinances, and you'll notice that we're referring to different events that are going on this summer, one of them being the Boogie on the Bricks, the other one is Brew Week. And each time we have street closings for these, we do pass ordinances that, number one, allow us to, authorizes the city to go ahead and close the streets, but then it also allows for vending and peddling for different businesses to conduct business during those events. So you'll see the titles repeated several times. Ordinance 4218 is an ordinance closing a portion of Court Street between Washington and Carpenter on Saturday, June 30th from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. on Sunday, July 1st, 2018 for Boogie on the Bricks, a family music and arts festival, and is introduced by Councilmember Katsas.
President Nisley, thank you. And with this ordinance, the title kind of pretty much says it all. That closure on Saturday, June 30th, between Union and State Street, and that is all of Court Street, or Court Street from Union to State. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks.
And do we any additional questions from? It's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
All right.
Ordinance 4318 is an ordinance suspending the enforcement of Athens City Code Section 13.04.10, unnecessary noise in the downtown area on Saturday, June 30th, until 1 a.m. on Sunday, July 1st, 2018 for Boogie on the Bricks, a family music and arts festival, introduced by Councilmember Katsas.
Okay. President Nisley, thank you. With this one, of course, just another one of those additional ordinances that has to go in hand with the closure. This is so that the event will not be violating any of our noise ordinances.
Ordinance 4418 is an ordinance suspending the enforcement of Athens City Code Chapter 11.04, vending, peddling, and soliciting to allow vending on a designated area on Saturday, June 30th until 1 a.m. on Sunday, July 1st during the Boogie on the Bricks Family Music and Arts Festival. This is introduced by Councilmember Katsas.
Thank you once again. And this ordinance once again allows Boogie on the Bricks to operate within their right as we suspend the vending and peddling ordinances that currently are on the books.
Okay. Ordinance 4518 is an ordinance closing a portion of Court Street between Washington and Carpenter on Saturday, July 21st, 2018 from 6 a.m. to midnight for Ohio Brew Week, introduced by Councilmember Katsas.
President Nisley, thank you. And this is just exactly like Boogie on the Bricks, but this is Brew Week, which is July 21st this year, and that is the Saturday last call event that we are closing the Court Street for. And not only do we have Court Street being closed from Washington to Carpenter, but they have also requested a closure of State Street between Congress and Mill.
Ordinance 4618 is an ordinance suspending the enforcement of Athens City Code, Section 13.04.10, unnecessary noise in the downtown area on July 21st, 2018 for Ohio Brew Week. And this is introduced by Councilmember Katsas.
President Nisley, thank you. This one, once again, just suspending our noise ordinance to allow Brew Week to have their bandstands and run into the early evening.
Okay. Ordinance 4718 is an ordinance suspending the enforcement of Athens City Code, Chapter 11.04, vending, peddling, and soliciting to allow vending in a designated area on Saturday, July 21st, 2018, during the Ohio Brew Week event, introduced by Councilmember Katsas.
President Nisley, thank you. This is Ordinance 04718, and this allows vending to happen during that Brew Week last call event.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to Ordinance 4818, and this is an ordinance amending Title 11, Business Regulations, Chapter 11.04, vending, peddling, and soliciting, and is introduced by Councilmember McGee.
Thank you, President Nisley. This may be a bit more controversial of a proposal. Just to give a general background, in October, I believe it was, I noticed that there were some parking spaces that were unavailable bordering the College Green because they were set aside for vendors, but there were no vendors parking in that area. I brought it to the attention of various citizens and persons, and the question was raised, well, why are these spaces not open for parking spaces? Since then, I went through an elaborate scheme to try to work something for the betterment of both vendors and the public as far as opening up those spaces and lowering fees for vendors and giving them opportunities to not pay during certain months. In the long run, it became rather cumbersome to appreciate. So this proposed ordinance would be a much simpler ordinance, and it would have the following changes from the current ordinance. It would first reduce from the parking spaces from 10 to 8 parking spaces. It would lower the fees, the monthly fees, from a current yearly fee of $1,500 to monthly fees of $125 per space. It would provide that if a vendor did not pay 3 months at a time for the space, that they would forfeit their right to that spot, since the vending would be assigned according to seniority. Most importantly, it would provide that there would be no Sunday reservations. That would allow vendors, since there's no fees being required for meters on Sundays, it would allow vendors to vend if they see fit to be there, but it would allow citizens to park there at any time Sunday as well. Finally, in an effort to accommodate some of the vendors, we considered opening up other vending areas at one point in time, and I received a lot of citizen feedback from that. So I proposed that Category B in this proposal would allow the mayor to set aside off-street vending areas. The two that would seem to be the most prominent would be over by the rec center, possibly, and then over by the West State ball fields. That would, again, allow him to determine what spaces could be available. I don't believe there would be any reservation, that it would just be set aside. It would have a daily fee, should the mayor approve that, of $25 per day. That's the crux of the amendment of these ordinances. I mean, the sections of the ordinance that would be amended. And I believe it would be a fair version that would provide somewhat of a relief to the citizens who would like to park in the spaces bordering the College Green. The situation currently, and I understand we've had months and months of bad weather, but we've also had months and months of very little use of those spaces. And as a result of that, this ordinance does not free up these spaces entirely, as I would like them to be more available for the public. But it does protect the vendors, I think, to a great degree. So thank you.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
Do council members have any questions or comments that they wish to address at this time?
I do. So some of the ideas that you're just looking at spaces and not have any of the other regulations that go along height, weight, length, those sort of things.
Yes, yes.
I think at some point we need to update those, because a lot of people have told me that they're kind of arcane and not necessarily people finding trucks that are not necessarily easy to find, because Athens is strange. I know we're strange, but we need to not be strange in certain areas. And we need to look at that. And so I would say that this is probably a preliminary change, and that other changes will come forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Butler?
Thank you. I just briefly wanted to acknowledge I appreciate some of the creativity regarding one facet in particular, and I do like empowering the mayor's office with the opportunity for the Category B license. I think there is a need at West State Street for vending. There's a lot of activities that take place there over the course of the summer, and I think that there has been a short supply of food options, and I think this is an opportunity to address some of that, so thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just have a quick one, because, you know, I see that switching that 1,500 per year, the annual fee, going to 125 per month. I mean, that does add additional, and I assume this is collected at the code office? Is that where this, I mean, administration is okay with increasing that workload? I mean, because you do it once a year now, or is it going to happen every month?
It'll impact code.
Okay.
Especially if someone is having to go down and get paying monthly, they're gonna go down to code to do it, and that's gonna have to be processed. And the other thing is the oversight. So making sure that those who are vending in the uptown area have a current vending permit, if it is a monthly permit. We're gonna have to color code them or something visible to where when code is going by, they know that someone has paid their monthly fee or an annual fee. I mean, I'm hoping that people can still, under this ordinance, this is the first I've seen it in this form, that people can pay for 11 months out of the year, because that is another change in here, that vendors would be authorized to vend 11 months out of the year, January 15th through December 15th. And so it'll be tracking that.
Okay.
So there will be administrative load placed on the code office.
And we do have one comment that was sent in by email to council members from a Patrick Doherty on 22 Hudson Street, who said he can't be here tonight, but he wanted to make the comment that he doesn't think the legislation looks out for the best interests and our community. He says if regulations need changed, a committee with representation from the mobile vending community should be formed to provide suggestions. So I wanted to communicate that one. And then do you want to open it up to see if other people?
Surely. At this time, we would open it up to public comment. We would ask that you give your name and state if you have any interest in any particular issue, such as a business interest, and whether you're a citizen of Athens, I believe.
Your name and address.
I believe we have a 3-minute limitation.
We do.
Thank you.
Could I just ask one question before we get there? Just popped in my head. If the mayor is going to have authority to allow vending in other spaces like the ball field or rec center, would that include any place in the residential areas, or is this strictly within our business or recreational area where you could allow vending?
This would only be city properties, as I understand what Member McGee has crafted, and it seems mostly in the park or recreational elements within the city of Athens. I do want to state for the record, and this is within the city code, I believe, if not, it's certainly a practice that has been done and is authorized, and that is if one receives permission from a business owner to vend at that business, which we often see at a lot of our businesses right now anyway, that's permissible, that they can vend with permission. They still have to go through and make sure that they have a vendor's permit and go through the health department, as all vending, all of our food trucks do. But that's a permissible area for one to vend, and I believe it's mostly in Bs, in the B zones, that takes place. I don't think it's anyone's authorized to vend in a R1 zone. I don't know that you can vend in any of the R zones, but I don't know that for a fact. But I know R1s you cannot.
How about some of our, like Sells Park or Camp Rotan? Those are city properties surrounded by residential. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know the answer, and I'm seeking it.
It's Member McGee's ordinance.
Okay.
I would be quite surprised if anybody would actually try to vend at Sells Park or Camp Rotan especially. I believe what the mayor has said is probably more appropriate, and that's something that all the citizens should understand. There's absolutely nothing that prohibits a citizen from vending on private property. They have the right to do that. What they would do is to meet the requirements of the code as far as the health requirements, and I believe there's a $25 per year peddler fee.
I would defer to the law director on the definitions between peddler versus vendor versus solicitor, because this particular ordinance speaks to all three.
Okay. But the changes have only been for the area, for the main part on bordering the College Green, and then opening up again for the mayor to approve certain areas at off-street vending. As far as whether he would approve off-street vending at Sells Park, I don't think there really is off-street vending there, a place for it. As far as off-street vending at Camp Rotan, good luck getting a truck in there. So I believe that answers it.
Okay.
Councilman?
Just further clarification on this last mayoral piece of this. I'm thinking of the soccer fields. So another place like the baseball fields that could benefit from maybe some food trucks, but that's not city property. So that would have to be the special agreement with Walmart or Aaron's or whatever it be, because obviously the snow cone guy's down there sometimes, so they've gotten those permissions. And so food trucks could do that.
They could.
Get those permissions and vend at that spot, and they wouldn't have to go through the mayor's permission.
That's correct.
That's where Soul started.
Okay.
That's where Soul started.
Yep.
Thank you.
And do we have a comment that anybody would like to make? Yes. Your name, address, and if you represent a group, and could you sign also? There's a sign in on the podium. Thank you.
Certainly. My name's Damon Crane. I live at 96 Hudson Avenue, and I own a hot potato food truck. I just wanted to put a couple things in perspective that were discussed. One being the additional administrative burden on the code office. I didn't really follow the color coding scheme. I more imagined a checklist with 8 lines on it. We have 8 vendors. That's not an enormous number of vendors. It seems pretty straightforward to see if the code office has received a check. The code office is responsible for enforcing a housing code in nearly 6,000 rental properties. It seems that 8 vendors, whether or not they've paid their money or not each month, wouldn't be an enormous burden. It would certainly be an additional burden, but it doesn't seem to me to be a very large burden. Also, the ability for vendors to operate on private property in certain areas of the city is an option in theory, not so much an option in practice. The 2 areas that, well, there are 3 areas I know of that used to permit vendors to operate in private lots in the uptown area. The one was the formerly Dale's BP, now Dale's Valero. They have an agreement with a vendor that they made a long time ago. They've made it very clear to other vendors that they're not interested in other vendors being there, and which is their prerogative, certainly. But I merely want to put into context that those options really don't exist so much in practice. Another lot is the lot between Lucky's and Attractions with the mining mural. That is where a mobile vending business, Tornado Potato, used to operate on weekends. The current owner of that lot no longer opens that up to vendors. And then I believe a few years ago, Alibaba's was operating on weekend nights by the, I think it was formerly a church building, by Lamborn's, the old Lamborn's location, and that didn't become available anymore, so Alibaba's had to move from there as well. So really, there aren't any private lots that are really accessible uptown right now to mobile vendors. So that's not really, in reality, so much of an option to vendors either. Lastly, I just wanted to share one thing on behalf of a vendor who has a trailer, folks who face different obstacles than I do with a truck. I was speaking earlier today with Brandon Buckley, who owns A-Town Pies and Fries, and his spot is adjacent to another vendor who operates a trailer. Their hitches face each other, given where their service windows are. And He's just struggling with, how do I get my trailer into this spot? My trailer weighs 6,000 pounds, can't move it with a dolly. The current spots really don't accommodate trailers. They really never did. And I think that that's a real problem with city planning, given that the oldest vendors in this town are trailers, not trucks like me.
Okay, and you'll need to close. Thank you so much for
Thank
the
you very
comments.
much.
Thanks. Is there anybody else who'd like to make a comment? Sure, come on up. And if you just sign in for us and then let us know your name and address.
So my name is Will Drury. I live at 7196 Urban Road, not in Athens city proper, but I do business in the city of Athens. I own the Cajun Clucker food truck, which is primarily stationed out at Little Fish. And I can say that the primary reason that I ended up full-time out at Little Fish was when I was first opening. I know there's been a number of changes in who operates the code office, but the previous program was so poorly run that I just had to abandon that business model. Several times I'd left an application there. You were supposed to be put on a waiting list, and then other people who started building a truck much longer after I was in business. Next thing I knew, they were parked on Union Street. And so I just kind of felt like there was just something, whether it was intentional or just lack of organization and oversight. It was a poorly administered program. And so I made other business choices. I will be moving back into more mobile vending soon, as Little Fish is finishing their own kitchen, which was always part of our plan. Excuse me. So I guess my first concern is how something like this would come about with never contacting any of the food vendors. I found about this at 1 o'clock on Facebook. I was out of town when this came up previously. But everyone has my contact information. I'm a known vendor in the town, but things are getting passed that jeopardize. I have a significant investment. Things are being jeopardized that will impact my livelihood and my investment. And I was never given an opportunity to give any input or any idea. And, I have grave concerns about that. Having just returned from multiple cities, part of my trip was to observe how they vend in other towns. I think we have a lot of opportunity with our food culture here to do great things, especially when you have something like AceNet, which is producing startup, incubating food businesses. But what's the point of having all of that and if we're not going to finish the program? So I'm not very well prepared because, again, I found them just by chance because I don't even know Damon, but I follow his Facebook page. So I would like to offer more. I'd like to have more of an opportunity. I'd really like to see, like it's done in many other places, where there is a broad vending guideline set by the city, and then mostly administered by people within the industry. Take the burden away from the city. We can sort it out. I think there's room for that. So that's really all I'd say. I'd like to participate more, but I just wasn't notified that something that was going to impact a significant investment was happening. So I'm not sure what the motivation for that was.
Well, we thank you for taking the time tonight. Glad you found out about it. This is the first of 3 public readings of the ordinance. So there will be time for comment and discussion.
Sure, thank you.
And yes, okay.
My name is Brittany Yancey. I live at 24 Joneswood Drive, and my husband Charles and I own Athene Weenie, which is also a local mobile food vending operation. I guess a couple concerns that we have are, like Damon was saying, the logistics of parking your trailer. There have been times we have come uptown and there has been a car in our spot, and we haven't been able to serve that day because we call city police says call city code says call city police, and we're just sitting there with our hands up in the air like we don't know what to do. And that definitely is a concern. Another thing is I'm not sure why we're stuck in those certain spots on Union Street and we can't park elsewhere, like late nights on like Friday, Saturday night, for instance. That end of Court Street is not as popular as it used to be. The north end is a lot more happening now, and I think it would be nice to have an option if food vendors want to maybe get an additional permit for an additional fee to be able to park at another end of Court Street to have better business late night and for weekends only, not, during lunch and things like that, just for late nights on weekends to have other options. I think the options to do at the rec center and the West State Street ball field are good options, and I do think that we should form some sort of like committee or something and have some more discussions about all of this, because I think some changes do need to be made, but I just think everybody needs to be in agreement. That way, logistically speaking, things can work out well with the other vendors. And that is it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight, making the comments. Okay. If we don't have any other comments from the audience, we'll move on to the next ordinance for the first reading. And this is Ordinance 4918, an ordinance granting a revocable license to Nicholas Kuhn, owner at 406 Elmwood Place, to allow a fence on the city right-of-way, and is introduced by Councilmember Fall.
Thank you. We talked about this last week. It's pretty straightforward. They went through the Zoning Board of Appeals because of setback requirements. All the paperwork has been put in, and basically it's a decorative fence that will be put around in the city right-of-way. A white picket fence.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. And any other comments or questions from council members at this point on the first reading? Okay. Ordinance 5018 is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a mutual aid agreement with the Ohio Wastewater Agency Response Network. This is introduced by Councilmember Butler.
Thank you, President Isley. This is a proposed MOU, which stands for the Ohio Wastewater Agency Response Network. I think primarily it's to benefit communities in which there will be an opportunity to share and assist during an emergency or a disruptive moment in which utility services, et cetera, are struggling. I think some of and council members have copies of this, and again, the devil's in the detail, but essentially this is offering us and the community an opportunity when needed. We're able to either request or provide emergency services and assistance to other members that are part of the mutual aid agreements. Some of the talking points within the MOU look at purpose as well as definitions, protocol, administration, procedures, how to request for the assistance, how to provide. Again, I think in the big overarching picture is that it's to assist us and to in emergency situations and to provide assistance.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
And any other comments or questions from council members at this point? Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I'll offer too that an emergency could be a natural or man-made event. Thank you.
Okay. Ordinance 5118 is an ordinance declaring certain items no longer needed for municipal purpose. This is introduced by Councilmember Butler.
Thank you, President Isley. This is just a simple procedure that we take care of on a regular basis regarding getting rid of items that are no longer needed for municipal purpose. Specifically here in this case, a 1985 International dump truck with 109,000 miles on it, a 2003 GMC Sierra 4x4 utility truck that has 95,000 miles on it, and then the former Aqua climbing wall that was at the old pool that will no longer be compatible with the new pool. we're looking to try to offer that to a nearby city entity. Thank you.
How many miles does it have on?
All right, thanks. Any other comments or questions? Then we'll move on to ordinance 5218, an ordinance amending ordinance 15217, the fringe benefits package for non-union personnel, section 19C, paid holidays. And this is introduced by Councilmember Reisner.
Thank you, Madam President. This ordinance, which is amending our ordinance 15217, as you mentioned, the fringe benefit package for non-union personnel, just brings our paid holiday paragraph here with some slight changes. It will, I can read them to you. At the end of paragraph C of section 19, it will read, employees will, and we're striking out the word not, be required to pass probation in order to receive their birthday holidays. This mainly affects, well, actually it does, affects our part-time employees, which at the moment we don't have any, but when we do, the old policy was that they could take their birthday holiday but anytime they chose during their stay here, which our full-time employees was not able to do because they had to wait until their probationary period was over. And this is just simply bringing it back into line with our full-time employees. Mayor, have anything to add to it? No. Okay.
Thanks. And we'll now have announcements and other business. Are there any announcements from council members? At this point, for next week's committee meeting, the only committees we have are planning and development and finance.
Transportation.
And transportation.
Oh, yeah.
And do we know of city and safety services?
Well, we do not at this time.
Okay, so 3 of our 4 committees then. Okay. And Mayor, any other? Yes.
No, I was going to say, may we have a meeting of the committee of the whole next week?
For, is there something that we have,
No, just
an agenda item? If we have an agenda item, we can.
not that I'm aware of, but
Okay.
that way we can all sit up here.
Council members are always welcome to come to every committee meeting. In fact, I hope you would. Mayor Patterson, do you have any announcements?
President Isley, I do not.
Thank you very much. We now have an opportunity for citizens to speak on legislative items and city services not covered on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to speak tonight about an item that we have not discussed already? Okay. All right, then we will have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Sounds unanimous. We are adjourned at 7:59 p.m. Thank you very much.